Good afternoon, colleagues. May I ask you to take your seats? Good afternoon again. I would like first to thank Ms. Marina von Weissenberg for her very able chairing of our consideration of item 9 on Wednesday. I note that you have worked very hard through contact group discussions so far in a spirit of compromise. I invite you to continue the same way this afternoon as we start considering our first conference room papers. Before we take up our first CRP, we will hear reports from our 4 contact groups on their progress. We will begin with Mr. Ezequiel Benitez Diaz, co-chair of contact group on the monitoring framework under item 3. Mr. Diaz, you have the floor. Microphone to Mexico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you know, the contact group met many times, and we are almost there. We were able to solve the binary indicators questions and all the preambular paragraphs of the recommendation to the Conference of the Parties, as well as the section regarding conclusions from SOPSTA. Still pending to work on the operational paragraphs. It was a good spirit for cooperation, and all participants were very much open to participate and willing to work. And so we hope that as this program for tomorrow's session, we can conclude our deliberations on the monitoring framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ezequiel, you and your co-chair for your hard work. And thanks to all members of the contact group. The contact group on the monitoring framework will continue its work tomorrow morning. Now we will continue with the report from the contact group on synthetic biology under item 5. For this, we will hear from Mr. Osama Abdelkawi of Egypt. Microphone to Egypt, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The contact group on synthetic biology convened twice yesterday, initially from 10 a.m. to 1:15 p.m. and subsequently from 7:30 p.m. to 11:45 p.m. The group worked on the second task that was mandated to them, namely considering the draft recommendation to be forwarded to the Conference of the Party, and as appropriate, the Conference of the Party serving a meeting to the party to the protocol, which had been prepared as a non-paper. The first session started with the general agreement that the non-paper crafted by the co-chair accurately reflected a balanced representation of all points of view captured in both the plenary and the initial session of the contact group. The members expressed their appreciation to the co-chair for their diligent efforts to address everyone's concern and encapsulated them within a compromise package. However, upon review, diverse opinions emerged regarding several key elements necessary for consolidating the overall package. As a result, my co-chair and I proceeded to collect views on some of the aspects, but lacked the time to further reflect and find compromise language to create a consolidated package. Nevertheless, notable progress was achieved. especially concerning the section of the document related to capacity building and development, technology transfer, and knowledge sharing. The exchange of views and perspective was highly constructive. Since different perspectives were shared and further consideration of delegation is required, the text contained a number of elements that the group discussed but could not finalize them given the time that was available. Despite not finalizing the text, the various views expressed during the contact group were added to the non-paper and forwarded for the preparation of a conference room paper. Finally, I would like to thank my co-chair as well as the delegates in the room for their intervention in the contact group. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ardokawi, and your co-chair, and all the members of contact group for your hard work. Next, we will hear report from contact group on marine and coastal biodiversity under item 8. For this, we will hear from Ms. Erika Lucero of Argentina.
Thank you, Chair. I had the pleasure of co-chairing the contact group on marine and coastal biodiversity together with Gaute Hansen from Norway. The contact group met 3 times, and as per your instructions, we focused on the non-paper on EPSAS and the non-paper on the conservation and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity. I'm pleased to report that we made considerable progress on the EPSA non-paper. We were able to discuss all parts of the document and to address and resolve many areas of divergent views, in particular thanks to the work of some small groups that work between the sessions of the contact group. Although some brackets remain in certain parts of the document, some of which may be able to be resolved here at SABSTA, we have a sound basis for progress on this issue at COP16. Regarding the non-paper on the conservation and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity, we were unfortunately not able to address the entirety of this document. We were only able to address the preamble paragraphs and paragraph 1 of the non-paper. I note that 11 operative paragraphs remained pending, as well as a sizable annex. I wish to thank all delegates for their constructive engagement and my co-chair for this collaboration in leading this group, and in particular for, in a personal note, being the first time co-chairing this contact group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lucero, and all the members of the contact group and your co-chair for your hard work, dedication, and persistence. Finally, on the contact group on biodiversity and health, we will hear from co-chair Mr. Yahidul Kabir of Bangladesh. Mr. Kabir, you have the floor. Microphone to Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, but Mr. Kabir is not here. I think another person from that group may contribute in the context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. We will come back later for the report of contact group on biodiversity and health. We will now begin our consideration of conference room papers. Under agenda item 4, scientific and technical needs to support the implementation of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, we had interventions from 45 parties and 8 observers. I have prepared 2 CRPs as a compromise text, CRP 1 and 2. I tried my best to balance different perspectives and divergent views so that we can move forward on this important issue to effectively support the implementation of framework. We will begin with CRP 1, matters related to the work program of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services under agenda item 4. I would like to go through this document paragraph by paragraph. We will start with first preambular paragraph under the draft recommendation. This paragraph starts with recalling the Are there any comments on this paragraph? So paragraph is approved. Now we will look at operative paragraph 1. Are there any comments? The Russian Federation.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair. So for this paragraph, at the first reading, we made few comments, specifically for subpoint E, where we stressed that from our perspective, issues related to right-based approaches need to be considered by appropriate UN bodies dealing with human rights. So we also may recollect that it was proposed initially by one of those bodies, although I don't recollect that we ever saw the official decision of the governance bodies to bring it to the convention. And from our perspective, they need to develop those documents, and after they develop, they bring it to us to consider. So we can't support this portion, and we can't bring more work both towards Executive Secretary, but also later on a BES, because there are specialized agencies for doing that. So, but we're okay with the second part. Of course, it needs to be modified, the language, in terms of its utilization. And we're usually talking not just about biodiversity, but normally about genetic resources. I mean, the work on equitable sharing of the benefits, that's a useful thing. We also like to stress that some other elements like B and A and D, there are also many other bodies, and we are interested to what extent we are basically entering the mandate of other bodies. So as a minimum, at the end of the chapeau text after meeting, we need clearly to add in cooperation with relevant UN agencies and in line with their respective mandates, because all those elements are cross-cutting and again initially to be considered by other bodies. So we have a concern about going this direction and significantly expanding the mandate of this convention, entering the other fields and other areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. May we adopt this paragraph with additional text, for which I will ask Secretariat to read.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I will highlight the insertion from the distinguished delegate from Russia. Let me start from the beginning. Request the Executive Secretary to prepare information, comma, the insertion start, in collaboration with relevant UN organization, comma, respecting their respective mandates, comma, on the following topics, which will go up to the sub numbering. And at the end of sub number E, we'll add arising from the utilization of genetic resources. Thank you.
Is there any objection to this insertion? The next on the list is Japan. Japan, are you referring to this insertion?
Sorry, this is about another subject.
Another.
With regards to the...
Japan, may I ask you to wait to resolve this? Argentina, is it about this insertion? Brazil? Thank you. Russian Federation?
Thank you, Chair. So we understand that we are in the part of the document which should not have any square brackets because it's a recommendation of SABSTA itself. So we can leave with your suggestion, but again, we will reiterate that this issue is to be sent to the Conference of the Parties. So we will come back to this point specifically, especially for E, but for others at COP. But at this point, we don't want to stop the process, so you can go ahead with the proposed additional text. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russian Federation. It is adopted. Approved. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We understand regarding to the paragraph 1A, we understand that IPBES global assessment identified pollution as a direct driver. So we like to suggest that maybe we should mention pollution as the main driver to address under this paragraph 1A and move chemicals and plastic as something included in pollution. So our suggestion is read as biodiversity and pollution, including chemicals and plastics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan. Is there any objection to this change? Brazil?
Thank you, Chair. So I was going to address 1A in my intervention. From our perspective, we would prefer to retain a more general reference to biodiversity and pollution. We do understand that there's been work undertaken to establish the Science Policy Panel on Chemicals. So we understand that it would be more constructive to maintain coherence with the drivers identified by the IPBES global assessment, and to have a more general reference to biodiversity and pollution rather than singling out specific pollutants. Though I appreciate the efforts from Japan, at this point in time, I would prefer not to single out any specific pollutants and have a more general reference to biodiversity and pollution. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Is it agreeable for Japan to have more general expression biodiversity and pollution? Thank you, Japan, very much. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And we thank Japan for the proposal. We could live with that proposal by Japan. For us, it's important that chemicals and waste, these two elements are reflected here. So I understood that Japan referred to plastic. We would, however, prefer, as mentioned in the first reading, biodiversity and pollution, including chemicals and waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. Could you kindly accept biodiversity and pollution? Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would support Brazil's comment on subpara A, but my comment regards the proposal to include biodiversity and climate change in this para. In 1D, as I recall in the discussions from IPBES 10, we had lengthy discussions about the proposal to devote the last of the available fast-track assessments until 2030 to biodiversity and climate change. And at that time, some of the considerations referred to the possibility of other emerging topics for that, but also that that would be significantly covered in the second global assessment, so that there would be the possibility to cover it there. I do think the repetition of this conversation is probably not necessarily going to add new information for this. So at this time, I would prefer that we take into account those conversations we already had at IPBES 10 and delete from here biodiversity and climate change, noting that the parties, if they so believe after the review of the scoping report of the second global assessment, feel that that is not enough, they will have the opportunity to present again at IPBES the proposal for this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. May we accept for small a, biodiversity and pollution? Is there any objection to this? I don't see. It's approved. Sweden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to support what Switzerland had said, to add including chemicals and waste instead of chemicals and plastics in A. And on D, we still would like to include biodiversity and climate change as a possible proposal that we can take into account in the next COP instead. Thank you.
Thank you. I think at this point it would be good to invite Secretariat to explain the further process.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just in case it helps, I mean, of course, we haven't yet looked at the other paragraphs, but it's envisaged that what the Secretariat's been asked to do is a scoping, and as part of that scoping, parties will be able to indicate nuances or details. So in this case, for instance, different types of pollution could be included, and you will indicate that in that scoping. So perhaps in that sense, it's not that critical, the precise words that you use now. I just offer that observation, given that you know, the scoping will be prepared in light of submissions on the views. Actually, I'm sorry, I am confusing this now with I'm confusing this now with the second CRP. So I take that back. I apologize. I do note, however, that there is one slot left for this last session for IPBES. And so in any case, the Conference of the Parties is going to have to make a choice, unless it wants to leave that choice to the IPBES plenary. It's going to have to make a choice among these 5, or indeed any others that it might consider. So this isn't going to be, I understand this as really asking the Secretariat to indicate, to prepare information on what this could cover. That would, you know, the substantive decisions on this will be made at COP, as already noted by the Russian Federation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In view that list is not finalized and will be discussed at COP, may we make a progress on this paragraph and accept biodiversity, sorry, biodiversity and pollution with A, B, C, D, E. Is that acceptable? Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yes, with the understanding that we keep biodiversity and climate change on that list, we can be flexible and just have biodiversity and pollution under A, but we would like to insist to have biodiversity and climate change just at this stage, knowing that we will decide on the final invitation at COP. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. Germany.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to echo what Switzerland just said. Thank you.
Thank you. Argentina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Though I know the decision is not final and this is just kind of information on scoping on that, I do feel quite strongly about not overburdening the Secretariat with more work that might not be necessary. The request or the issue about devoting this last fast-track assessment to biodiversity and climate change is already included in the IPBES agenda, so to say. So the matter is established for discussion already there. I would be very careful about adding more and more requests to the Secretariat for production of more documents for COP16. That is my main concern also, that we have so far discussed and had conversations and having to tackle with the issues of asking more than is possible to prepare for a meeting, and then more than is possible for the delegations, in particular small delegations, to cover. So my issue is that if that, not to preclude the conversation, but I feel quite strongly about not keep adding more requests of documents that might put us in a delicate position of not having documents in time or not being able to review them accurately for COP16, when this matter is already included in the discussions of the body to which we're going to send this recommendation. So I would just ask in that matter if the other parties could reconsider this fact, knowing that this is an ongoing discussion in IPBES already. Thank you.
Thank you. Democratic Republic of Congo.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, pour la parole. La République démocratique du Congo voudrait ajouter quelque chose au niveau des points E. Donc, après l'utilisation de la biodiversité, on a proposé d'ajouter et des ressources génétiques et au partage, après les partages, on ajoute juste avant équitable. Donc la proposition va se lire comme suite. Les approches fondées sur les droits, y compris les questions relatives au genre, à la conservation et à l'utilisation durable de la biodiversité et des ressources génétiques et au partage juste, équitable des avantages découlant de leur utilisation. Donc après biologique, on ajoute et des ressources génétiques. Et puis après partage, on ajoute juste. C'est ça la proposition.
Thank you very much, DRC. I would like to ask Secretariat to read this part.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, with the insertion from DRC, we will, the number E, read as follows. Rights-based approaches, including issues related to gender, to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, insertion start, and genetic resources, comma, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources.
Maybe it can help to, if it is read again.
I was advised that the genetic resources was already added, so let me read it again. Right-based approaches, including issues related to gender, to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources.
DRC is microphone to Democratic Republic of Congo.
Oui, vous avez à sauter juste avant équitable. On partage juste et équitable. Le mot juste, vous n'avez pas ajouté.
The welfare is here. Do you need?
I will read it again. I will read it even more slowly so that interpreter can deliver everything. Right-based approaches, including issues related to gender, to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources. Full stop. Thank you.
United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank colleagues for suggesting changes to this paragraph E. I think, like others, we wonder whether IPBES is the right body to be doing this type of work. We certainly see that the other topics that have been identified biodiversity and pollution, particularly biodiversity and poverty, biodiversity and climate change, really do feel as though they're within the remit of IPBES. But we do wonder whether the whole of the section E, including the rights-based approaches, all the way through to the looking at the fair and equitable sharing of benefits from the use of genetic resources, is really in their remit. And we wonder whether we might be better directing this sort of attention at some other bodies. So our suggestion would to not include E at all in this and to focus on the other areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In a view that this will be decided at COP finally, I would like to ask everyone to move on really to discuss other issues. May I say that this paragraph is approved? Democratic Republic of Congo, I still have your request for the floor.
Oui, je voudrais compléter qu'il y a une décision politique qui doit entériner cela.
India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to seek some clarification. When we are saying that this Executive Secretary to prepare information, just want to find out as to what is the mechanism of preparation of this information. Is it based only on the papers, etc., review material or research material available with that body, or is it in consultation with the concerned national government? How exactly is it going to be prepared? Because our experience in other forums has been that some papers are taken out of context and some papers are left out. So what exactly is the mechanism is the clarification I want to seek before I can make any intervention here.
Thank you very much, India. For the sake of time, I would like to ask Secretariat to explain the process.
Thank you. If you look at COP 1519 and the background documents for that, you will see the information that we prepared for the assessments that were then approved in 1519. So COP made a request to IPBES for assessments in that recommendation as well. So the IPBES has a standard format for request for assessments. The Secretariat completes that standard form for the consideration of parties as an information document to help them to make this decision. It is based on the research of the Secretariat. It then goes as part of the request, but then it's not the scoping paper for the assessment. The scoping paper for the assessment is a very detailed process that involves the IPBES parties, and that's developed once this list is approved. So in terms of the burden on the Secretariat, it's not an extensive amount of work to prepare these forms. However, the scoping papers are quite an extensive piece of work, but that's something that IPBES does, not us.
Thank you very much for this explanation, and I don't see any more requests for the floor. The paragraph is approved. Now we are going to the next operational paragraph, which starts with also request. May I invite your comments on this paragraph? I don't see any request for the floor. It's approved. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And sorry to come back again to this paragraph. Would have a minor amendment. At the last line, would suggest adding to make use as appropriate of the deliverables for each of the 4 functions of the platform, rather than to make use of all deliverables. We do understand that some deliverables have not undergone an intergovernmental process, so we would suggest adding this caveat as appropriate of the deliverables for each of the 4 functions of the platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brazil. Do I have any opposition to this insertion? I don't see. France, you have the floor.
Oui, merci Madame la Présidente. Dans ce paragraphe, nous aimerions également introduire un élément qui fait référence à la compilation des vues des parties suite à la notification 2024-006, résumée dans le document CDB/SAPSTA/26/3 ad 1. Nous pensons que les éléments qui figurent dans ce document sont une base utile pour renforcer la coopération entre la Convention et la plateforme et doivent guider cette analyse conjointe. Nous aimerions donc ajouter au tout début de ce paragraphe, et je vais le faire en anglais, After also requests the Executive Secretary, we would like to add, taking into account views summarized as included in document CDB/SAPSTA/26/3 ad 1, comma, as appropriate, comma. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Is there any objection to this insertion? I don't see any. So, paragraph 8, Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. So my understanding is that document at 1 provides indeed a compilation of views from parties. We do notice that there were not many submissions received. So it would sound a bit awkward for us to endorse the views of only a few number of parties. Even though it, as proposed by France, it would be referred to as taken into account, we do acknowledge that those views have not been reviewed actually by SAPSTA. So my take on this is that it would be premature to suggest that we are endorsing those views. So we would rather not to include this, given that we didn't actually have time to discuss those proposals on collaboration between the Secretariat and IPBES. Thank you.
Argentina, you have the floor. Is it on the same?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would, my comment were very similar to those in line of Brazil. I think several parties have commented through this meeting that the calls for submissions have received not that many replies from parties, and it would be endorsing the views of very few parties. At this time, I would prefer not to include a specific reference to the document. Thank you.
France, can you accept not to have this insertion here? Austria, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I was going to support the proposal for an insertion from France with the qualification as appropriate. I think that should be very okay. And parties have submitted views, and I think these views have also merit to be taken into account by the Secretariat as appropriate. So therefore, I hope that it's with that insertion that should be acceptable for our distinguished colleague from Argentina and Brazil. Thank you.
Belgium, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to say exactly what Austria just mentioned, because all parties were invited to give their views. Maybe only some parties did it, but it's still valuable information, and we asked it for in another decision. So I would like also, with the word as appropriate, that it could be accepted acceptable for the delegations of Brazil and Argentina. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Brazil and Argentina, is that acceptable for you as appropriate? Floor to Argentina, please.
Gracias, señora presidenta, y en el espíritu de los grupos de contacto había estado hablando en inglés, pero ahora voy a volver a hablar en castellano. Entiendo que voy a continuar hablando en castellano ahora, aprovechando la traducción. En relación a la inclusión de esta compilación de las perspectivas de las partes, sigue resultando una visión particular de algunas partes. Y si vamos a evaluar su inclusión, me gustaría que entonces podamos contar la información de cuántas y cuáles son las partes de las que contamos con sus opiniones. Esta información está incluida en los documentos. Está incluida en los documentos. Y refleja un nivel de participación bajo. I'm sorry, I will continue in English because this is cumbersome. I'm sorry. This is still showing a very low participation in this process. It is true that only a few parties answered, but all parties were invited. But it is more to a more broad point about the possibility of all parties to actually engage in these calls for submissions when and we've been discussing this back and forth on the actual possibility of, in particular, of developing countries to engage in these requests for views, for comments. And at this time, I do think in this particular document, the amount of responses from parties is not significant enough as to the total of parties of the convention to merit the inclusion in the text. Of course, this does not preclude that this will be taken into account as much as all the information the parties provide. But I don't see the merit in including it here. I think we should strive for a process as inclusive as possible and not to just take into account the opinions of those parties that were at that time in a position to be able to send their comments and views. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your inputs, but I really need to remind all of you that we do have here 4 CRPs for discussion this afternoon. We do not have a time for very detailed discussions. From another side, it is our intention to keep text simple as possible, with the trust to Secretariat that will take into account all relevant facts that they have. So I will ask France, Austria, and Belgium if you can live with text as it is. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Sí, en esta ocasión nos asociamos con lo que expresa Argentina. Si vemos el documento de trabajo, indica que la Secretaría, en respuesta a la notificación 2023-120, recibió 50 respuestas, solo 10 de las partes. Entonces, es una representación muy limitada, de tal suerte que estaríamos de acuerdo en que no se incluya esta precisión. Además, nos parece que estamos cayendo en un micromanejo. La Secretaría usualmente tiene una relación de colaboración con IPBES desde hace muchos años y lo que estamos simplemente solicitando es que preparen documentos en función de los temas que hemos identificado como opciones para que las llene dentro del formato. No entiendo por qué estamos entrando en tantos detalles y me preocupa muchísimo que llevamos solamente 2 párrafos de un documento de 4 CRPs que tenemos pendientes y no estamos entrando a temas realmente sustantivos, estamos hablando de procedimientos y los estamos complicando todavía más. Así es que invito a las partes a que seamos más pragmáticos, más ejecutivos y que no hagamos el trabajo que le corresponde a la Secretaría. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Mexico, for your intervention. Then, again, I'm asking parties to accept text as it is. And Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So we share views and explanations given to us by Brazil and Argentina, and we very much support your suggested way forward and support what you said to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe then move on with this paragraph approved. I don't see any request for the floor anymore. Belgium, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And we didn't capture the addition by Brazil correctly, but as you've said, you've approved this paragraph, we can probably live with it, but we would like next time, please, can you better capture intervention by parties? And taking into account that this paragraph is also reflecting things that we're going to discuss just in a few moments under the draft recommendation. Under 5C, I would already like to propose that we could copy this whole paragraph to replace 5C. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. Austria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to make a general point here. When the COP decides that the Secretariat should issue a notification and invite parties to provide submissions on the basis of this notification, and some or many parties respond to this notification should be taken into account somehow by the Secretariat. Otherwise, all this exercise would be in vain, and the work of the parties that have responded would be in vain. And I would be really very much concerned to give this signal that when parties submit information to the Secretariat, it is not taken into account. That is not a motivating thing for parties really for the next time when they get a notification from the Secretariat to respond. So actually, I respond because I believe that the Secretariat benefits from my response and takes the work into account in its work. That is why I'm really concerned when we are not in a position here to, with such a, how to say, weak wording, to ask the Secretariat to take note or take into account as appropriate of those views of parties who have responded to the notification and who have done that work, actually, that the COP has asked for. So that is a real general concern to me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your general comment and your concern. But I do think there is a high level of trust of parties to this convention, to the Secretariat, and they're taking into account all submissions they are getting from parties. Now we are moving to the next operational paragraph, starting with recalling decisions 1113. Is there any comment on this one? DRC, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, pour la parole. Les commentaires, c'est par rapport à la première décision qui est écrite. Décision, vous faites référence à la décision 11/13C. Est-ce que les C là qu'on a ajouté, est-ce qu'il existe, s'agit-il d'une erreur ou par rapport à cette référence, s'agit-il de décision 11/13 ou les C là, c'est là où on voulait avoir des éclaircissements.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I mean, this particular decision had 3 subsections, and the relevant subsection is section C, which is why that's referenced in this case.
Thank you. With this, I don't see any more any request more for the floor. The paragraph is approved. We are going to the next one, recalling also that I'm asking for your comments on this paragraph. I don't see any request for the floor. It's approved. The next one is welcoming the decision by the plenary. No request for the floor. Thank you. The next one is noting the ongoing and so on. Thank you very much. It's approved. Number 1, takes note. No request for the floor. Number 2, request that the subsidiary body. No request. Thank you. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is on operative paragraph 2 here. We regret that, you know, at this agenda, we discussed IPES under a sub-item of another agenda item, and we would therefore suggest to add at the end of this paragraph, under a standing agenda item dedicated to IPES. We think it's worth to have also under substa a dedicated standing agenda item to consider the work of IPES. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. Is there any opposition to this insertion? Belgium, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We can agree with the proposal by Switzerland, but there's a small editorial thing because we think that at the beginning of the phrase subsidiary body is only mentioned and it should be the substa. So could we ask the Secretariat just to give the right reference? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. It is not that we oppose the proposal from Switzerland, but at least from our side, it would be important to have more clarity on potential budgetary implications of introducing a new agenda item. In any case, we understand that the agenda of subsidies is decided by the Bureau, but it would be helpful to understand if there would be any budgetary implications. Thank you.
Sweden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to support the statement by Switzerland and Belgium to add this, and we could perhaps qualify it by adding at the end of that saying in line with decision 15/19, please.
I will ask Secretariat to read the insertion.
Thank you. The insertion after present decision reads, under a standing agenda item dedicated to the platform in line with Decision 15/19.
I will invite Secretariat to respond to the question of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I mean, I note that we do already have, as reflected in the chapeau here, many other earlier decisions which establish the way we work with IPBES. To address Brazil's point, I think obviously the work that needs to be done for any item has budgetary implications, but whether or not this is done under a dedicated agenda item doesn't really have a budgetary implication. I do note that you know, the substers addressed matters related to IPBES perhaps of two different types. One is of this type that we have here now, which is essentially is procedural or about a work program. And I understand the request to have that as a dedicated item. I note that at Subster 25, we were discussing a different type of matter related to IPBES, and these were looking at the implications of particular assessments. And of course, we also had other agenda items related to those assessments, and there was also, in that case, if I recall correctly, some wish to look at the other related substantive issue, in this case that we were talking about wildlife management on the one hand, invasive species on the other. A number of parties wanted to look at that in conjunction with the relevant deliverable of IPBES. So I just wonder, you know, to what extent you want to constrain future subster bureaus in terms of how the agenda's organized. But you know, to address the specific question from Brazil, I don't think whether it's in one item or two items, it has a budgetary implication. Thank you. As far as I can think.
Thank you. Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have some concerns about the proposal from Switzerland, and not only still from potential implications, not only financial, but first of all, workload. Every subster the last few years is a super complex and has too much on the table to do. And now the proposal as it is formulated will require us to come to IPBES agenda items at each subster, twice during intersessional period between COPs. So what's the point? Including whether we will have actually anything to discuss at each subster. And I also agree with the acting executive secretary in terms of constraining the subster bureau in terms of setting the agenda for upcoming SABSTA meetings. I think that we already have a good practice where very often we consider IPBES items one or another way, whether the implications for the further work of the convention or giving any kind of advice and guidance and request to IPBES. We think this practice is good, and I don't see also any issue or any risk that this practice will not continue. So we think that it's really too much to request for this item to be a standing agenda item for every single SABSTA. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Switzerland.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. For us, it's just important that if we discuss important matters related to IPBES, that we discuss it under a dedicated item. So in that sense, we could maybe reformulate to say under a dedicated agenda item to IPBES. And then it's not standing, but if we discuss substantive matters related to IPBES, it should not be in an add one, but it should be under a dedicated item. And we could also add as appropriate, but for us, it's just important if we discuss substantive matters as we do today, we should have a dedicated agenda item because it also, underlines the importance of this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brazil, is that agreeable with you? Russian Federation.
So we already have dedicated items every time, and the dedication depends on parties' agreements at COP. And we also would not like to prescribe to COP what will be agenda items for COP to decide for the next period of time. And again, I reiterate that we do it anyway. So I don't see any need to formulate something, because whatever is coming from IPBES, SABSTA and COP, I usually consider it. Also, I like to draw your attention to the annex of the document we are discussing. We didn't come to it maybe yet, but I didn't see any comments that people do not like, parties do not like this annex, which actually provide a schedule for this very subsidiary body to consider items coming from IPBES. What else we need when we already have a schedule to consider them? Colleagues, please just see the document in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Switzerland, I hope you can accept this explanation. Belgium.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to reiterate what Switzerland has mentioned, that this time IPBES was not a specific agenda item. It was under another agenda item, and that is just the thing that Switzerland wants to make clear. We shouldn't have IPBES as a sub agenda item. It should read an agenda item 4, then maybe not agenda item 5, which just mentioned IPBES. That's what I understand about the additional wording from Switzerland. And I hope that also replies to what Russian Federation just mentioned. The question is only a dedicated agenda item and not a sub agenda item. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. Just to remind you that it was on agenda of SABSTA 25 in that way. So if you can accept to the text as it is. Thank you very much. I don't see any more, any request for the floor. Operational paragraph 2 is approved. 3, starting with invites the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform, Germany.
Madam Chair, apologies. May I come back to para 1 with an editorial change?
Germany, I would not like to go back to open again this paragraph. And if it is of editorial nature, please send it to Secretariat. Secretariat is anyway doing editorials after document is agreed. Thank you very much. Paragraph 4. Paragraph 4, starting with encourages parties. Is there any request for the floor? No, it's approved. 5, request executive secretary with ABC. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. In 5A, we would just like to seek clarification on the proper protocol. We believe we should be inviting the Executive Secretary of IPBES to participate in meetings of the liaison group. And we're not clear about the wording to facilitate the participation of. So we just wondered if it should be invites and perhaps be a separate paragraph. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
I will invite Secretariat to explain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the liaison group of biodiversity-related conventions is a group that, as you know, includes a number of biodiversity-related conventions. The Secretariat's all represented at the level of the Executive Secretary. So what we would do if the COP approves this text is consult and the other Executive Secretaries to seek their agreement that the Executive Secretary of IPBES would be invited to also join those meetings.
Thank you. Belgium.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just would like to remind you about my request to copy the paragraph from the recommendation, the substance recommendation to replace the current C. Thank you.
Is there any objection to copy paragraph 2 of substance recommendation to this part? Russian Federation.
So that's my comment is on subpoint B. So if you like me now, or I can do later.
I didn't see any objection to proposal of Belgium. It's accepted. Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Thank you. We'd just like to find a way to specify here. We ask the Executive Secretary to constantly, never-ending updating the document, because in each intersessional period for the future, so I don't know when there is an end of this update, but also we don't really fully understand update based on what, how that's to be updated. So maybe Secretariat can provide some information on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you. As IPBES adopts new assessments or approves new assessments, then those would be added to this list. So it would be very straightforward. As you can see, the table includes the previous assessments, it includes the upcoming assessments. So if an assessment is approved, then it would be added. So at SAPSTA 58, the list may be quite different because of the fact that IPBES would have had very different assessments. Thanks.
Thank you, Secretariat. Russian Federation, can you accept this explanation? Thank you very much. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I think I might be able to help here. So rather than update the annex to the document, SBSTA document, it's the annex to this decision that should be updated. It's the same thing, but that may help with clarity, that it's the annex to this decision that COP will take, that we update the table regularly with IPBES assessments and ideas. Thank you.
Russian Federation, you have the floor.
If this is the case, then I only can thank Australia for this proposal, because it's definitely will be much better to have a reference to the decision and annexes of the decision rather than to some document potentially difficult to find in the future.
I will ask Secretariat to read.
Thank you. So it'll say to update the annex to this decision and make it available on the website of the Secretariat and at a meeting of the subsidiary body in each intersessional period. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I don't see any request for the floor for the moment. So operational paragraph 5 in this part is approved. Sweden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a point of clarification, because the annex to this decision seems to only indicate future assessments. The paragraph before that said past and future assessments doesn't really apply here. So which is the annex that is referred to? Is it this one or the one in the document? Okay. And just one more thing. I just realized looking at my computer what day it is. Let me congratulate our neighbor country Norway with the Grattis med dagen. It's their national day. Thank you.
Congratulations. I will ask Secretariat again to answer your question.
As we already have the previous decisions, I would assume that those would not be updated. Those would be retained over time. It would be difficult for us to go back and reconsider every time how the previous decisions were considered. And so as a decision moves from previous to future, then only the future ones will need updating because the previous ones would be already set and in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Egypt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Egypt supports already what is said by the Secretariat, but at the same time, when you have a table with ongoing and the future one based on all of the decision of IPBES, we have to consider the previous one. So far as I remember, there are almost 11 good studies and assessments that were made. So it is a combination of everything. So it is not only one study, whatever. We still go back to the old ones as well, like the ones about the biodiversity assessment, one about invasive species, the same thing for pollinators, etc. So we are in favor of keeping all of these past, ongoing, and future ones. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I will ask everyone not to discuss these things in detail, because I think this is one of the easiest that we have today. Russian Federation.
Madam Chair, we have a specific suggestion which may help. So if instead of saying to update the annex to document, we may say to update, if we wish, we can say table, I don't know how to call it, but to give the full name, overview of previous and future deliverables of IPBES and their relevance in the decision-making of the convention. If necessary, in parentheses, we may say as contained in the document initially contained. So then we know that it's a running document, we have the name of the document, we understand what it is about, because otherwise, who knows what is the annex in whatever document, which even document just a pre-sessional document, yeah? So maybe that will be a better solution and also more clarity.
Thank you very much, Russian Federation. Is this agreeable with all parties? Thank you. I don't see any requests for the floor for the moment. And with this, as there are no comments on Annex, I would like to say CRP1 is approved. Now, I would like to present the second CRP under agenda item 4, CRP2, scientific needs to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Please note that there are two brackets in paragraph 2 and 4C. They are there because the matter is to be discussed at the COP16. We will go through this document paragraph by paragraph. Now we will take the first preamble paragraph under the draft recommendations, starting with recognizing that the identification and so on. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just want to make a minor amendment on the 6th line, and just to say the Convention on Biological Diversity and its protocols. Thank you.
So this particular reference to the Convention on Biological Diversity is actually referring to the programme of work on Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So here, I think the reference to the protocols would not be correct, because it's referring to the 8J programme of work, which belongs to the Convention, not to the protocols. Thank you.
Thank you. DRC, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, pour la parole accordée. J'ai deux petits amendements à ce niveau. D'abord, à la troisième ligne, je souhaite qu'on dise « autre processus en cours ». Par exemple, je me souviens à Genève, l'année passée, on n'a pas réussi à adopter un nouveau programme de travail sur l'article 8J, c'est-à-dire c'est un processus encore en cours et qu'il faille préciser cela à ce niveau. Ensuite, à la cinquième ligne, là où on parle de renforcement des capacités, je souhaiterais qu'on ajoute « et développement ». Merci.
Is there any objection to these insertions from DRC? I don't see any request for the floor. Thank you very much. This paragraph is approved. The next one, welcoming the establishment. Russian Federation.
Madam Chair, we suggest to delete this paragraph from here because, again, it's a section of this particular substa. To be honest, we were never briefed on what's going on with this work. We didn't hear from the bureaus, one or another, on what's going on there. So they are not established. We will have actually discussion, substantial discussion on those elements next week at SBI. So at this stage, we can't do that. So please delete this paragraph. If we want, I don't remember the whole paragraphs of the draft COP decisions. It can be moved there because we hope very much that by COP, we will be updated on the status on those developments, and maybe we will be in a position to welcome it, but not at this stage when they do not exist, they are not established, and we even don't know where we are with this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russian Federation. Is there any opposition to deletion of this part, welcoming Canada? You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies. Thank you, Chair. Canada submitted an alternate proposal under this agenda item, which isn't entirely reflected in the text of the CRP2. A key element of our proposal intended to ensure that the scientific and technical advice from SBSTA under this item would be provided to the subsidiary body on implementation for its consideration to guide its discussions on the programs of work, multi-year program of work, and administrative and budgetary matters, and to help inform the items on cooperation, mainstreaming, and capacity building, scientific and technical assistance, clearinghouse mechanism, and knowledge management. With this in mind, rather than deleting this paragraph, we would like to suggest that preambular paragraph 2 be forwarded to SBI 4 for its consideration under agenda item 5 of its agenda. Thank you, Chair.
I will ask Canada to wait discussion about paragraph 5 and continue with this, but I'm asking for objection to deletion of welcoming Egypt. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Egypt is not in favor of deleting this item simply because it is being discussed in the agenda of the SPI, and perhaps some decisions or recommendations we'll make. This is number one. Number two, there exist many centers of excellence that they deal with biodiversity in terms of expertise, library, whatever, etc. It is not here to put establishment, because if you establish something, that means that you have to put criteria for that. So for the sake of time, we are asking that not to delete it, but just to put it in practice for the time being until SBI finish their business next week. Thank you.
I will give the floor to Secretariat.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, I should, apologize, because I think the Secretariat made a mistake here. The intention was to put this paragraph, this preamble paragraph, not in the draft recommendation, but in the draft decision, as the delegate from the Russian Federation already sort of noted. And the basis was that it provides part of the rationale for what is referred to in the draft decision later on, for example, in paragraph 4b. So the initial submission on this was welcoming the establishment and then recognizing the role of that of those centres potentially in looking at scientific and technical needs. So perhaps now also taking into account Egypt's point, it would be best to move it for now to the beginning of the section on the Conference of the Parties. Of course, when you get there, you may decide whether or not you want to keep it there or whether you want to put it in brackets pending discussions in SBI. But certainly, they haven't yet been established, so it can't really be in this part, and it certainly can't be in brackets, because obviously that would not have any meaning in a recommendation. An alternative, of course, would be to recall the COP decision, I think 15.9, which which called for the process for the establishment. So that if you want to keep something here, you could do that. But I should first let me repeat. I apologise that this is here, because it should not have been here. It should have been in the COP decision part after paragraph 7. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then maybe make decision to move this in the beginning of. Thank you very much. Canada, do you still wish the floor?
We support that proposal. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you very much. The next paragraph, paragraph 1, takes note. I don't see any request for the floor. Paragraph 2 concludes that. Canada.
Thank you, Chair. My intervention is regarding paragraph 1. For paragraph 1 of the substantive recommendation, we'd like to add a footnote requesting that the information documents be transformed into annexes or addendums for consideration by COP16, as we consider these documents as important elements which form the basis of our recommendations, and we'd like to see them translated. Thank you, Chair.
I will give the floor to Secretariat.
Thank you. So I note that to translate all of these documents would have significant budgetary implications. I mean, one solution is simply to ask that they also be made available to the COP. I mean, they are available, obviously, anyway, on the website, but we would make sure that we refer to them in the COP, or you indeed could referred to them already. When you get to the draft decision, you could refer back to these documents if you so wish, so that the COP has them in front of them.
Canada, I hope this is acceptable for you. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So in paragraph 1, we would have a minor amendment. So at the last line, after the reference to document CBD substa 26/M/19, we would add a sentence saying, comma, while noting the different views and comments received during substa 26. I think from our perspective, we need to be cautious when referring to INF documents and annexes that have not been reviewed, and not suggest in any way that they have been somehow endorsed by parties or that we did have time to review them in depth during this meeting, given that we didn't. So we would suggest adding this addendum to make clear that some countries did provide comments and there were different views on those documents. Regarding the proposal from Canada, I would just perhaps ask some clarification. Do they want those documents to be available in the different languages of the UN so that countries could consult? Because when I heard their proposal, it seems that they were suggesting that those elements within those different documents would be included in the pre-session documents of COP. So it was just a matter of clarification from our side. It was not clear whether they want only the translation of those documents or to include elements of those documents within the draft decisions and documents to be negotiated at COP. Thank you.
Information from info documents is always included in working documents, in summarized way, so to be available to all parties. But as it was explained, there is no way to have translation of full information documents to all UN languages. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Me referiré al párrafo 2. En este sentido, en el documento de análisis preparado por la Secretaría, se menciona la necesidad...
Argentina, I have to ask you to stop because we have insertion in paragraph 1 from Brazil.
Okay.
Is it on this? Is there any objection for insertion in paragraph 1 given by Brazil? Egypt, you have the floor.
We in favor of what already stated by the Secretariat because of the budget implications for that. But perhaps an alternative is just to provide a very brief or a brief summary just for people to know, to attract their attention to go and read. Because by the time we finish reading all of the documents, practically speaking, we have enough of info. Not everyone go and read info. So, but in fact, these 3 documents are very, very, very important. So we are providing just alternative, if possible. In just 1 paragraph, what they talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Egypt. Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regard to the suggestion from Canada, so we can't support it, the first part of it. The second part, of course, if there are any resources to have those documents available in 6 languages, that will be great. But the first suggestion was actually making them annexes of this document. And that's we can't support because we never look at those annexes here as annexes. So we can't agree to make them suddenly annexes here inside the document and being then sent as a pre-session document to COP. Of course, parties still have opportunity at COP to bring to this agenda item information from those 3 information documents and make them part of the COP decision in annexes. That's always an open opportunity, but we can't do it here and now Also because, for example, we even don't have a contact group on this particular document and never come to that. So we can't do that. In regard to the suggestion from Brazil, we may support the insertion of language as suggested by Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope this is acceptable for Canada. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We can support making these information documents available for consideration by the COP. However, if they are referred to in the COP decision, then we would like to request that they be translated or have components of them included as addendums or annexes to the documentation prepared for COP. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada, but I understand this process needs a long, long time to be agreed, and this is not place really to do this. Now I'm asking for insertion from Brazil in paragraph 1. Is there any objection to this? I don't see any, so paragraph 1 is approved. Paragraph 2, Argentina, you started your comment with paragraph 2. Please continue. Floor to Argentina.
Gracias, señora presidenta. El análisis elaborado por la Secretaría refiere a la subimplementación de las guías y, como tal, también refiere a la necesidad de fortalecer la capacidad de las partes que son países en desarrollo para utilizar esas herramientas y guías. En este sentido, propongo, de acuerdo a lo propuesto en la primera lectura del documento, la inclusión al final del párrafo 2 del siguiente texto. But that adequate financial resources and capacity building and development and technical and scientific cooperation are needed for parties for implementation.
I will ask you to read it again in dictation speed.
But that adequate financial resources and capacity building and development and technical and scientific cooperation are needed for parties for implementation.
Is there any opposition to insertion of Argentina? I don't see any. Thank you. It's approved. Paragraph 3. I would like to ask, starting Canada, you wish.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies. I wanted to come back in on paragraph 2. You were too quick for me. We wanted to propose a few modifications. In the first line, we don't think that the analysis that was conducted for this agenda item concludes that all of the substantial guidance largely remains relevant. So we would like to insert the word some of after concludes that. So concludes that some of the substantial guidance that has been developed under the Convention on Biological Diversity, and rather than largely remains relevant, we would like to say is relevant. And we would like to add for the implementation of the KMGBF. And in the fourth line, after through other processes, we would like to add that also support implementation of the framework. And the second part of the paragraph, which refers to mainstreaming, as well as the proposal from Argentina, we believe this is addressed or could be addressed in a different paragraph, under a different paragraph. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. But from my side, on your second insertion for implementation of Kunming-Montreal, it is already in the title of document, if I may remind you. Are there any objection to insertion of Canada? Egypt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the proposal from Canada will complicate the whole things. I mean, the whole analysis been done to make two things. Number one, what are the gaps based on what's already there? And then if there is a possibility to provide guidance, that's fine. I mean, but you don't have to provide guidance on all aspects, otherwise it will be very, very complicated, and it will interfere with other guidance from other organizations and from other institutions as well. So we are in favor of keeping it as it is. But when it comes to mainstreaming, it may be that we could separate it into other parts when it deals with mainstreaming. Thank you.
Thank you, Egypt, very much. India, Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. ¿Pudieran volver a repetir los cambios que propuso Canadá? Entiendo que la primera parte es para ser un poco más realista las orientaciones que tenemos dentro del convenio. Después hizo otra inserción que era redundante con el título y la explicación de en qué otro lugar pudiera mandar el tema de mainstreaming, porque nos parece válido aquí y si lo quieren pasar a otra sección tendríamos que saber exactamente cuál es y bajo qué circunstancias. Gracias.
Thank you, Mexico. I will ask Secretariat to read.
Yes, thank you. So it reads, concludes that some of the substantial guidance that has been developed under the Convention of Biological Diversity is relevant for the implementation of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and that there is a wealth of tools and guidance developed through other processes that also support the implementation of the framework and potential to work with them to mainstream consideration from the framework into their activities.
Netherlands, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much for the floor. We don't have any objections to the proposal from Canada, but regarding the proposal of Argentina earlier on, I would like to make one small suggestion. We welcome their proposal, but would only make a slight change. The suggestion was, but that adequate financial resources, etc., are needed, and we would suggest to change that to and. Just because parties can already use the guidance that has been produced, while we at the same time recognize that financial assistance and guidance is necessary, it's not a prerequisite to be able to use the guidance itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So we would add our voices to the proposal from Argentina. Regarding the proposal from Canada, we do understand the rationale behind those changes. I was just wondering that we would prefer perhaps to replace some of the substantial guidance with many guidance materials. We do understand that the Convention has already developed a significant number of materials that could support the implementation of the framework. So we fear that the way that they proposed some of the substantial guidance somehow does not convey that message. And we wouldn't like to send the message that we need to kind of reinvent all the potential guidance materials that could be developed, and that we should make best use of what already exists, given the heavy workload under the convention, and the challenges we faced even during the preparation of SBSTA, where many documents were published in a late date, on a very short notice. So we would be fine with the other amendments proposed by then, but perhaps we would suggest rephrasing the beginning of this paragraph as concludes that many guidance materials that have been developed under the Convention on Biological Diversity, and then we could go along with the way that they proposed this to amend the paragraph. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brazil. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The rationale for our proposal for the addition of some of was to reflect that we believe some of the existing guidance under the convention needs updating to remain relevant and to reflect the KMGBF. We can go along with the proposal from Brazil so that it says concludes that many guidance materials rather than some of. And then in terms of our proposal for the last part of the paragraph, we would prefer that the paragraph stop after through other processes that also support implementation of the framework, full stop. And the second part of the paragraph regarding means of implementation could be moved under paragraph 5 because this is relevant to what will be discussed next week under the subsidiary body on implementation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Canada, India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. For the first part, I think we'll go along with the amendment suggested by Argentina, and would like to support Brazil regarding para 2, and would like to retain para 3 where it is, because that is important for the entire understanding of the, the welcoming part. Thank you.
Thank you. I will ask Secretariat to read.
I will read all the insertions so far. Concludes that many guidance that has been developed under the Convention on Biological Diversity are relevant, and that there is a wealth of tools and guidance developed through other processes that also support the implementation of the framework and potential to work with them to mainstream consideration from the framework into their activities, and that adequate financial resources, capacity building and development, and technical and scientific cooperation are needed for parties for implementation. Full stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. United Kingdom. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would just like to support the language that has been put forward. I do think that the Canadian proposal is a good one because it's important that we show that there's guidance not only from the CBD but from a number of other organisations that is relevant here to support parties as they implement the GBF. I do wonder, though, whether it just makes the language a little bit simpler if we conclude that most of the substantial guidance that has been developed. I thought that might be neater than having many, it doesn't fit. I also had a second suggestion here is that we note in the report from the Secretariat was that sometimes some of this guidance, particularly from other organisations, isn't always as accessible to the parties. And I was wondering whether we could also include in here some language to reflect that. And that I would perhaps suggest that we put it into the proposal, which I think came from Brazil, apologies, but where we talk about but that adequate financial resources is needed. I wondered whether we could also include but access to the guidance as well as adequate financial resources. Do you want me to repeat that?
Secretariat will read.
So I will read again with the insertion from UK. Concludes that most of substantial guidance that has been developed under the convention are relevant, and that there is a wealth of tools and guidance developed through other processes that also support the implementation of the framework and potential to work with them to mainstream consideration from the framework into their activities, and that access to the guidance, adequate financial resources, capacity building and development, and technical scientific cooperation are needed for parties for implementation. Full stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. May we agree on paragraph as it is now? I don't see any request for the floor. It is approved as amended. Thank you very much. Paragraph 3 recognizes that there are gaps. And in this moment, I would like to ask you for your general views on this paragraph. Netherlands, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much for the floor. I would like to make one small deletion to the paragraph, which is the reference to the annex in the recommendation, considering that the annex has been also quite a bit amended, and it's a summary from an INF document. And after the amendments in this current version, I believe that there are 7 or 8 targets that have been removed from the annex. And therefore, it's not a correct reflection of the INF doc number 15, and therefore we prefer to just delete the whole thing and keep the reference to the INF doc itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Netherlands. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to support the reference to the annex of the CRP, noting, however, that there are some oversights that would need to be addressed. Notably, the reference to Indigenous and local communities in Target 2 should be changed to Indigenous peoples and local communities. And Target 22 should clearly indicate at the end of the paragraph that we are referring to Indigenous peoples and local communities, women and girls, children and youth, and persons with disabilities as agreed under Target 22 of the KMGF.
Canada, I have to stop you. We are not discussing annex. We are not commenting annex in this moment.
Okay.
Paragraph 3.
We would like to support keeping the reference to the annex in paragraph 3. Thank you, Chair.
Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. So regarding paragraph 3, Well, we do realize that there might have been some confusion, given that the annex seems to be an annex to the draft decision rather than annex to the recommendation. From our perspective, we would prefer a more streamlined version of this paragraph, which would read, recognizes that there are gaps in tools and guidance to support the implementation of the framework, comma, and notes the different views expressed by parties during subset 26. And we would delete the sentence starting with including those indicated. The reason for that is that, as we have been saying, we do understand the added value of those INF documents, but we do notice that many of the conclusions that are outlined in those documents are not consistent with the agreed language of the targets and goals, and they introduce a number of topics that are actually not covered by the goals and targets of the framework. We hope to engage in the discussion of the annex that has been included in the recommendation, given that from our perspective, if this is being included in the draft decision, this should be open to discussion. So there are a number of issues that do not reflect in a balanced manner the different components of the goals and targets of the GBF. So we would prefer a streamlined version of paragraph 3, recognizes that there are gaps in tools and guidance to support the implementation of the framework, comma, and notes the different views expressed by parties during substa 26 in that regard. Thank you.
Russian Federation has the floor.
Brazil said my word, because obviously this annex is not to this document, and there is no reason to have any annexes to recommendations of substa itself. So this annex belongs to another document, which is a draft decisions of the COP. So it should not be here, and the streamlined version proposed by Brazil much better for this paragraph and for the place where this paragraph is. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Belgium, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. As already mentioned in our intervention during plenary, we see already what we hear now from Brazil, from Canada as well, and the changes that have been made in that annex, that a contact group would have been much better. If we want to keep this annex in the recommendation, draft recommendation, or draft decision for COP, it means we need extensive consultation. So we prefer to not have it annexed to the draft recommendation and not mention it at all, but just reword the paragraph 3 after substa 26/3, in particular chapter 4, as well as its annex. Because if we really want to add the annex to the recommendation or the draft decision, we really need extensive discussions, which we will not have the time to do, according to us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium.
Should I read together with Brazilian social?
Secretariat will read.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will try to read different insertions in one paragraph. Recognizes that there are gaps in tools and guidance to support the implementation of the framework, including the document CBD substat 26/3, in particular section 4 and its annex, while noting a range of different views expressed by parties during substat 26 in that regard. Full stop.
Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to the Secretariat for reading the amended text. However, we still think that when you add recognizes and then you have including and a reference to the different documents, you are suggesting that we are accepting the gaps that have been proposed or suggested within those documents. And I think we've been pretty vocal and said that, well, we'll need to reflect upon this. It is unfortunate that we actually didn't have time, as mentioned by the distinguished colleague from Belgium, but we're not in a position to endorse recommendations or conclusions that we didn't have time to discuss. This is a pilot-driven process. It is not an inf-document-driven process. So we are not in a position to accept the reference to including those ta-da-da and so on. We would prefer, as we said, a more streamlined version of the paragraph. We would, of course, recognize for gaps and note the different views expressed in that regard. Thank you.
Is there any objection to Brazil's proposal? New Zealand, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We appreciate the points being made by our distinguished colleague from Brazil. We would really like, if possible, to include a noting reference to Substa 26.3, Section 4 in its annex, because it does contain a rich wealth of material on gaps we should be considering, and this can then provide a source of guidance on how we can address specific gaps within the existing work programs. Also, if we reference it here, then we won't need to negotiate the annex that's attached to currently to these recommendations.
because that's simply a summary of what's presented here. So perhaps a compromise could be to recognize that there are gaps in tools and guidance, and also note, in relation to this, note the information on those gaps indicated in document 26.3, section 4 and its annex. Thank you.
Thank you. Netherlands, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. And my colleague from New Zealand said exactly what I wanted to share. So support that. Thank you.
Norway.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and also thank you to Sweden for congratulating us and for our independence from them. We would also like to support the comment from New Zealand. Thank you.
I will ask Secretariat to read.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It now reads as follows: recognizes that there are gaps in tools and guidance to support the implementation of the framework and notes the analysis in document CBD Substar 26/3, in particular Chapter 4 and its annex, as well as the range of different views expressed by parties during Substar 26 in that regard.
Do I see any objection to this text? Mexico, you have the floor.
Just for clarification, if we accept this, then we don't need to include the annex in this document. Thank you. So if that's the case, we can go along. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we agreed on the text of paragraph 3. It's approved. Paragraph 4 also recognizes. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Recommendation paragraph 4, we support paragraphs A, B, and C, as these are directly related to the targets of the KMGBF, which is within the scope of the COP15 decision. We would suggest making a reference to the specific target that new work would support at the end of each paragraph. We would also like to add, after the wording, the following topics to address gaps in tools and guidance. In addition, our alternate proposal recognized a longer list of gaps, and in our view, they should also be addressed as topics for potential new work. So we would like to add the following targets, which based on the analysis are the targets with the most critical gaps. And that would include target 4, target 8, target 11, target 12, target 14, target 15, target 18, and target 22. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the first comment on the chapeau. So we suggest to modify the words on the second line, because we believe that subject to further consideration is preemptive, because it's actually reads as Conference of the Parties will consider those topics. But the COP will consider whether to include those topics into further program of work or not, but not that that will be actually decided here. So that's following topics, subject for consideration by conference of the parties for inclusion in its program of work, to me, to be more clear. So we also can support A, B, and C as, again, directly relevant to particular and important targets. So, and we don't want to have any further paragraphs. We also like to remind everyone where we are. We are in the recommendations of SBSTA for basically SBSTA for SBSTA, because recommendations of SBSTA for or other bodies for COP are further down. So we also like to remind all of us that when we negotiated GBF, it was absolutely clear that GBF is not just CBD framework. We clearly said it's a framework for all and for all organizations. That means that other organizations, they may have their role, their work to deliver on GBF. It's not necessarily need to be done exclusively only through our convention. And we need to remember about it when we formulate certain elements for the program of work of this convention, staying fully within the mandate and operations of this convention, and bearing in mind the scope and volume of work. Thank you.
Thank you. Malawi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi would just want to understand the previous CRP that we have just approved has also indicated some of the topics that have been highlighted here, like the topic on biodiversity and pollution, though in this one it has started with pollution and biodiversity. And also the topic D was also highlighted in the previous CRP. And my understanding is those topics were submitted for work for the assessment to be done by IPBES. I'm wondering what type of new work is going to happen on these. Maybe are there any linkages between the proposed topics which are in this CRP to the ones which we have just recently approved? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. I'll invite Secretariat to respond.
So, indeed, as Malawi said, some of the issues here also appeared in the list in CRP1. I just note two points. One, obviously, that list in CRP1 of potential requests to IPBES is still subject to confirmation, and there is only a slot for one assessment to be done by IPBES, and I think that assessment would not report until 2029. So that timing issue needs to be taken into account, whereas here, of course, we are talking about work that would potentially begin in 2025, so or immediately after COP16. I also note that this is a list, as emphasized by the Russian Federation as well, for further consideration by the COP, or for consideration by the COP. The idea again here is to have a short list on which the Secretariat prepares further information to inform that decision by the COP. So the COP may decide to include one or none or all of these points when we get to COP16. But my understanding of this, combined with the brackets that exist, at least so far in the draft decision, is that this doesn't prejudge that decision of COP. It's just really to ask for information to support COP in making the decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Sweden, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. In line with some of the previous speaker, we don't consider it fully clear how the prioritization of new areas of work have been made in relation to the gaps identified and presented in the pre-session document. So we would appreciate more information from the Secretariat on this, and also supports the intersessional work in paragraph 6 below. But also with regards to considering the modifications of wording proposed now and the proposed additions by Canada, we have a compromise which would not actually, to clarify that this paragraph would not preempt the intersessional work nor the discussions at COP16. So in the chapeau, we would add after potential, need, and after new work to be advanced, comma, especially but not excluding, comma. Thank you.
New Zealand, you have the floor.
Oh, Mexico, sorry. I heard New Zealand, sorry. A reflection on this procedure, these topics are being subject for the identification of gaps for the implementation of the framework. But we should also remind that we have, through a COP decision, a process to identify new and emerging issues. So this is something different. And to fulfill, there's a number of criteria where we need to choose. So we have two elements here. In one hand, in the previous document, we identify these elements, but IPBES only can include one assessment. So one of those that we are sending among many others, and it will be a decision of IPBES to what to do with which topic. But if we are considering now, for the purpose of the Kunming-Montreal framework, that these 4 topics are important. So it implies that we need more information to decide, as the acting executive secretary said, if we can choose one or all of them to work and to incorporate into the work of the convention. But I also like to remind that we have some criteria already for including these issues. So maybe it's a good idea also to pass through those criteria with information in how to include into the agenda of our convention. There's a number of criteria there about the relevance at the global level and other elements. So, and this is also coming from a reflection in how to improve the implementation of our current framework. I think it's important to think about it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And so regarding this paragraph, We regret that the reference to bioeconomy was lost along the way. We do think that is a missed opportunity to advance discussions in this regard. But, I mean, to not delay the work, I think we could agree with the 4 areas that have been outlined in paragraph 4. Regarding the proposal from Canada, which from my perspective is not quite clear as how we would insert the reference to these specific targets, I would be a bit hesitant to accept a long list of targets. I mean, I noticed that they mentioned targets 4, 8, 11, 12, 14, 15, 18, and 22. I think this could open up a long discussion about which targets could be prioritized over others. So at least at this stage, we will not be in a position to accept listing specific targets, because this might seem to suggest that the other targets may not benefit from work under the convention. So we would prefer not to include the list of targets. And at least from Brazil's perspective, we will need to include, for instance, target 13 on benefit sharing. So we would prefer not to engage in that discussion at this point in time. I think we could go along with the proposal from Sweden about kind of leaving this in a more flexible way. I would just flag that, at least from our side, usually the terminology is including but not limited, rather than especially but not excluding. So just some food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We just wanted to support the proposal by Canada that we link each work program to its respective target. So program A would be linked to target 1, so we could just include the words in support of target 1, and the same for B and C. And just to further ensure that we maintain the alignment with the GBF targets, on C, on sustainable bio-based activities, products and services, we would add the words which enhance biodiversity. And we think this is important because, as we know, over-exploitation is one of the direct drivers of loss. So we think it's just important to use the target 9 wording here. Thank you.
I will invite Secretariat to read the first part.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will try to read with all the insertions so far. Also recognizes that there is a potential need for new work to be advanced, comma, especially but not excluding, comma, in some of the following topics to address gaps in tools and guidance, comma, subject to consideration by the Conference of the Parties at its 16th meeting for inclusion in the programs of work. Stop here.
Thank you, Secretary. Is there any objection to first part of this paragraph? I don't see any. Thank you. And now we do have a question about adding targets to the list. Democratic Republic of Congo.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente, pour la parole. Le cadre mondial, nous l'avons voulu cohérent et harmonieux. Et les différents éléments sont interconnectés d'une manière ou d'une autre. Par exemple, quand on parle de la planification spatiale ici, c'est la cible 1, oui, mais je dirais aussi la cible 2 sur la restauration nécessite la planification spatiale. La cible 3 aussi sur la conservation nécessite la planification spatiale. La cible 10, la cible... En fait, si on cite ici les cibles, on va diminuer, en tout cas, la nécessité d'avoir le cadre que nous avons voulu pour l'ensemble des gouvernements et de la société. Et que donc, nous ne pouvons pas accepter à ce niveau qu'on puisse citer certaines cibles à ce niveau. Merci.
Thank you, DRC. May we accept for A, small a, as it is? Canada?
Thank you, Chair. This isn't specific to 4A, but just generally, we'd just like to note that paragraph 4 simply recognizes that there's a potential need for new work to be advanced, and that this is going to be forwarded to SBI for its consideration next week, for consideration of the programs of work and the multi-year program of work. And this is simply recognizing that there is the potential for work in these areas, and that our proposal to include the list of targets responds to the analysis that was completed, where we feel there's been the most critical need and where there's the most critical gaps identified through the analysis that's recognized in paragraph 3. So again, our preference would be to include the list of targets with the critical gaps and forward that to SBI for consideration under the programs of work and multi-year program of work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada, but I understand that list of targets, as DRC said, to be associated with A, B, C, D is not discussed, and it would take a lot of discussion, technical discussion about which targets to associate with A, B, C, D. I really do think that we do not have time now, and this item didn't have contact group to discuss it. It would be really in this stage be very risky to start the discussion which target. We need to, this is the list which will be decided later. Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I said before, we can support only first 3 points, but I also like to reflect on Canadian proposal. I may understand the desire maybe to simplify and make some direct correlations. But again, I like to remind, similar to what my colleague from DRC said, we developed this new framework actually different from Aichi targets, because we want all those targets to be completely integrated, interrelated, and not to be that simplistic. And here, simplicity is a danger. When you try to silo a particular item to a particular only one target, you will be losing the entire intention of the whole framework. I think that DRC clearly gave examples and stated. I mean, sustainable biodiversity-based activities. It's not just one target, it's almost across all of them, for example. And the same with other two. So that's why we strongly disagree with the attempt to silo topics to a particular single target of the framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to point out a few things here. One is that when we are talking about various objectives that you're meeting here that subject to further consideration, and we are A, B, C, and D, then to map the individual items with the targets might be very difficult and is actually not feasible or practicable. And I do support Republic of Congo and Russia in what they have just mentioned. Regarding item D, one of the, it is qualifying only conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Probably we could mention related to the objectives of the convention. That would include all the other aspects as well. So these were the two interventions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. India, may I ask you to read your second point again?
The second point, Chair, was that when you're saying, relating to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, so what I'm saying is to align this with the objectives of the convention, so the amendment would read relating to the objectives of the convention, rather than confining ourselves to conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity alone.
Uruguay, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Nosotros compartimos plenamente lo expresado por la Federación de Rusia y por la República Democrática del Congo, también su visión sobre cómo proseguir con este asunto, así que simplemente queríamos apoyar eso. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Fiji, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Fiji also support the intervention from the DRC. Thank you.
Then I have to go to Canada and ask if there is will to compromise with views of other parties not to include targets, as this action will limit actually scope of items A, B, C, D.
Thank you, Chair. I think we came prepared here to have a technical discussion and to forward our discussion to the SBI for consideration. I know there was a proposal or an intervention from Mexico noting that if we include a long list of targets here, that it could be subject to like the process for new and emerging issues. However, we note that there was a decision from COP15 that identifies that the KMGBF is to be used as the strategic plan for the convention. So these are already priorities determined by the COP. And this is just simply recognizing that there's gaps and needs to support implementation of those targets, and that these are potential areas for new work. However, in the spirit of compromise, we can go along with the general feeling of the room, and we thank you, Chair.
I thank you for your spirit of compromise. Then I need to ask Russian Federation. If you can agree with insertion of India. Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for missing your question first. As it was already mentioned, we are okay with first three. For the fourth, if I'm understanding correct, the proposal of India, then it's deletion of this item and the text that is replacing. And if you could read it out, that would help.
Thank you. Secretariat will read.
Thank you. So paragraph D read with the Indian insertion, equity and the human right-based approach in line with the objectives of the convention. Thank you.
Russian Federation, is that acceptable for you?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, but no. We clearly stated we can't proceed with this particular item. I'd like to remind colleagues that we accepted the similar language in the previous CRP, of course with the understanding that we will reopen it at COP. But we accepted it there. I will explain why. Because that was a potential direction to another body, to EBS, to do this work. So here in the convention, as I said previously, we believe that many different organizations, especially in UN system, need to have their role and do their piece of work for the GBF. And that's exactly an example of it. The work for other UN bodies. I am happy to include a paragraph basically inviting, requesting Executive Secretary or basically COP can directly invite those bodies to develop those guidelines, tool, etc., and this work, and then report back to us as the custodians of the GBF. We are custodians. We are not the only implementer and developer of it. And that needs to be clearly sent out as a message from convention to the rest, at least of UN system, but actually globally, for all stakeholders. And instead, we are trying, in violation of our own mandate, bring it all here, put it on shoulders of Secretariat, but also on our shoulders. I'm happy to you know, if Secretariat will organize a poll in this particular room to clearly ask how many human rights specialists and delegations here who will work on those tools and guidelines, while we have specialized organizations consisting only of human rights specialists and experts. Let them do that, their professional work. We have other professions and other focus. Thank you.
Belgium, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And taking into account the time that it is of the day and the minutes that you still have left, I would like to remind parties that there's also the paragraph 6, which clearly mentions that there will be an intersessional work, so we do not need to decide yet at this moment. So there can be others, there can be changes, but parties have to express. And I hope that more than 10 will express their views, so that every party can accept it. But we shouldn't also forget that there's existing programs of work, but we'll come into that later on once we finish this paragraph. But there is in paragraph 6 intersessional work. We can have more, we can have less, and I hope that we can advance tonight. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. With these expressions from Russian Federation and from Belgium, I'm asking parties if you can agree with deletion of 4D with the view that parties could make submission mentioned in paragraph 6, that we still didn't go there, and express their request for this part of work to be done later on. Maybe delete 4D. I don't see any opposition to this. 4D is deleted and 4 is approved as amended. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to understand if for its C is also approved with the amendment from New Zealand.
Secretariat will read 4C.
The C with the insertion from New Zealand now read as follows: sustainable biodiversity-based activities, products, and services which enhance biodiversity. Thank you.
South Africa, do you have a...
Yes, thank you so much. South Africa is not in a position to support the insertion by New Zealand. Sustainable biodiversity-based activity, products and services in South Africa do not only enhance conservation, it also contribute to economic development and equitable distribution of benefits. Therefore, we cannot support the singling out of conservation on this aspect. Then we'll like to maintain C as it was in the CRP. Thank you.
New Zealand, can you accept this expression of South Africa? May we accept 4C as it was? I don't see request for the floor from New Zealand. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We could accept the deletion of our insertion, and we could equally accept a modified insertion which enhance biodiversity and its contributions to people. That's a suggestion to South Africa, but we are flexible. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand, for your flexibility. Paragraph 5 invites the subsidiary body. I just wish to thank again New Zealand for flexibility, and we move on. Paragraph 5 invites, and first on the list is Sweden. Sweden, you have the floor.
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah, good. In our statement made during the first reading, we proposed a paragraph to acknowledge that there are also gaps in the existing work programs identified in Chapter 4, Section B of the pre-session document, and which we see a need to be addressed. This was not included in the CRP, so we would like to propose it as a 4 bis, and I will read it out to you, but I would also like to recall the decision or the paragraph 9 in the decision of the GBF, which actually requested the Executive Secretary to carry out this review and to propose draft proposals for the updating of existing programs of work. So it reads 4 bis, acknowledges that there are gaps in the programs of work of the Convention, as mentioned in Chapter 4, Section B of document CBD/Substa/26/3 that need to be addressed. Thank you.
Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and sorry to come back, but with regards to paragraph 4C, we would prefer to retain the language as agreed upon under Target 9, sustainable biodiversity-based activities, products, and services that enhance biodiversity. We share the same perspective of South Africa. We do understand that those products provide a wide range of socioeconomic and environmental benefits, and that is actually included in the target, in Target 9. But I think we would be cautious not to reopen the agreed language under the targets of the GBF. So I would also like to react to the proposal just made by Sweden, but I'll wait for some guidance from your side.
Just to remind Brazil that it was approved and agreed, and I have to inform you we need to finish the session. Sorry, colleagues, we need to adjourn this session, and we will reconvene at 7:30. But I just wish to tell you, in this way we will not finish anything. Yeah, Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of order. You had said that we had agreed upon for A through C, but I had requested my hand before, actually. So perhaps the Secretariat has missed my request for the floor, but just to flag that I did request the hand before. I did request the floor before you said it was agreed upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. So the session is adjourned. We are here at 7:30.